In this lesson, we're specifically going to connect the demographic transition model to the epidemiologic model. Let's quickly recap all 4 of these stages. Let's start with stage 1. Remember, no country is currently in stage 1. There may be some remote areas of countries that are in stage 1, but no country is in stage 1. Stage 1 is where we were throughout most of human history. It is described by a very high birth rate, a very high death rate, and a very low natural increase rate. The causes of this stage are pre-industrial fertility and mortality. This means prior to birth control being developed, as well as a lack of medical technology and advancement. Looking at stage 2, it is fair to say that all countries have at least entered a stage 2. This stage is classified with a high birth rate, a rapidly declining crude death rate, and a very high natural increase rate. This is certainly the stage that you're going to see the highest population growth. This is due to the industrial or medical revolution and how that impacted the crude death rate. It's important to note that Europe and North America entered stage 2 because of the Industrial Revolution. Other countries, however, especially your developing countries that are now in stage 2, actually entered more so because of the medical revolution, the expansion of vaccines, and other ways of treating diseases. This has in large part been made possible by the World Health Organization, which is a branch of the United Nations. Now looking at stage 3, we see that the crude birth rate is rapidly declining, the crude death rate is moderately declining, and the natural increase rate is growing, but it's moderate. The causes are economic and social forces on the crude birth rate. Basically, you see people moving out of rural areas into urban cities, and the increased wealth and job opportunities make it less of a desire to have more children. The 4th stage of the demographic transition is classified by a very low crude birth rate, a low or slightly increasing death rate, and 0 or negative increase in population, or the NIR, natural increase rate. This is due to continued social change on the crude birth rate. So because that country has been in a stage 3 for long enough, they've got aged out demographic groups. And so you're going to see even more of that experienced desire to not have kids and pursue careers. You also see more equity between males and females. So those opportunities are even further extended to women who end up ultimately making those decisions. Again, this is what the demographic transition model looks like when it is graphed. Take some time to look at each of the stages. Each of the lines should correlate to what you know about crude birth rates, crude death rates, and how that impacts the natural increase. This is just a graph I wanted to show you for the possible stage 5, which we talked about in a previous lesson, but I wanted to be able to bump this up with the original demographic transition model for perspective. A possible stage 5 will be characterized by a very low crude birth rate, an increasing crude death rate, and a declining natural increase rate. So whereas in stage 4 you saw 0 or negative NIR or population growth, in stage 5 you're going to see a declining population growth. And so that is going to be much more distinctive. And the reason for that is because now that your age groups have started to increase on the population pyramid, you're going to see far less younger women who are able to childbear. And therefore, even though women may be making decisions not to have children, there are even fewer women who are able to make that decision. Remember, we talked about Japan being one of the first countries that may enter a stage 5. And a stage 5 population pyramid will look opposite from that of a stage 2 population pyramid with a very distinctive wide base. Rather than it being at the bottom for stage 2, it will be at the top for stage 5. To give you a visual representation of this, I will show you figure 2-40 on page 69 of your textbook again. I know I showed you this in a previous lesson, but it helps give you some perspective. We might as well take another look at figure 2-22. And in this figure, we can see 4 different population pyramids that are reflective of 3 stages. So the Gambia is in stage 2. Mexico here is in stage 3, and Denmark and the United States would be classified as stage 4. Okay, now let's take some time to connect the demographic transition to the epidemiologic transition. The epidemiologic transition is going to focus on the distinctive health threats in each stage of the demographic transition. What that means is this can help us better understand what might be contributing to the death rates in each of those stages. First, let's look at stage 1, pestilence and famine. When we look at deaths in stage 1, we can attribute that to infectious and parasitic diseases. These were the primary causes of human deaths in stage 1. History's most violent stage 1 epidemic was the Black Plague. At least 25 million Europeans died between 1347 and 1350 due to the Black Plague. Getting into stage 2 of the epidemiologic transition, we're looking at receding pandemics. That means that pandemics still exist, but they're not as deadly or lethal. When we think of a pandemic, that's a disease that occurs over a wide geographic area and affects a high proportion of the population. Because in stage 2, we saw improved sanitation, nutrition, and medicine because of the Industrial Revolution, this reduced the spread of infectious diseases. Stage 3 is characterized by degenerative diseases. Stage 3 of the epidemiologic transition is characterized by a decrease in deaths from infectious diseases, but an increase in chronic disorders that are associated with aging. These kinds of diseases would include heart attacks or different forms of cancer. Again, because in stage 3, people have longer life expectancies and they are living longer, a lot of the causes for why people pass would be due to things you would see in later age. Lastly, we have stage 4, and that is classified by delayed degenerative diseases. What that means is we're still going to see some of the same reasons for cause of death that we saw in stage 3. So we're still going to see cardiovascular disease or heart disease as a leading cause, as well as various forms of cancer. You're going to see that in stage 4, however, individuals are going to be living longer. They're going to be able to respond to those diseases differently and be able to extend life even in dealing with those diseases. So, for example, there may be more advancements in medicine. Behavior changes can also impact a longer life and allow those to linger as well. And at the same time, there may be different medical ways to either prevent cancer from spreading or remove it altogether. Also, people can undertake operations and bypass surgeries. Let's spend a little bit of time looking at a few maps from the epidemiologic transition section of your textbook. This is figure 2-30, and it's located on page 64 of your textbook. This map is going to show stage 2, which focuses on disease. And this particular disease that we're looking at is cholera. And countries reporting cholera in recent years are found primarily in sub-Saharan Africa as well as South Asia. The reason that cholera persists in these developing regions is because of the lack to access to clean drinking water. Figure 2-31, also located on page 64 of your textbook, will give you some historical context to cholera. To better understand the spread of cholera, Dr. John Snow, a British physician, created a handmade GIS in 1854. On a map of London's Soho neighborhood, Snow overlaid two other maps, one that showed the addresses of cholera victims and the other that showed the locations of water pumps. For the poor residents of Soho, water pumps were the principal source of water for drinking, cleaning, and cooking. The overlay maps showed that cholera victims were not distributed uniformly through Soho. Rather, they were clustered around one pump on Broad Street. Tests at the Broad Street pump proved that the water there was contaminated, and further investigation revealed that contaminated sewage was getting into the water supply near the pump. This map, figure 2-32, located on page 65 of your textbook, is going to show stage 3 disease, specifically male cancer. We can actually see here that cancer is an example of a cause of death for men that is higher in developed countries than it is in developing ones. But it is important to note that stage 2 countries have lower incidences of cancer, primarily because they have a relatively low life expectancy in those regions, so people don't get to the ages where they're more inclined to experience those cancers. Another stage 4 disease that I don't have a map for, but there is a map for it on page 65 of your textbook, deals with obesity. And so obesity is a health problem in the United States and is increasingly becoming a problem in Southwest Asia and North Africa. So stage 4 related deaths may have a lot to do in connection with obesity. This is the end of the lesson, connecting the demographic transition model to the epidemiologic transition model. My hope is that you better understand how those correlate and that the epidemiologic transition model deals with causes for the crude death rate within the DTM. Please return to our class for a discussion on this lesson.